Well, good morning or good afternoon, and welcome to an extremely hot day in the tropics. Uh, and you might be wondering, why am I wearing a shirt in the tropics? And because I had somebody whinging like a little baby the other day about me doing a video without a shirt on. So I thought, well, if it helps someone to hear this message by me putting on a shirt, then ta-da. So. Whatever it takes, right? So I wanted to remake. We've got a little frog, toad, something coming to pay me a visit down here. I wanted to remake the video that I did on racism the other day, because I had a few people comment to me about just different aspects of the video that I did make, and I often get people inbox me about videos, and I've had a few people today saying, wow, thanks for your videos, I love them, and that's a regular thing, and I'm grateful. But I'm also grateful for people when they say things like, can you clarify this part or that part? I'm sort of hearing it, but I can't quite, and for anyone out there studying A Course in Miracles, of course, I get a lot of people that say these videos are very helpful to them, and I had one lady just now who lives in Florida who said she wished she lived closer so she could listen to me, but everything I have to say really is on the video, so it's not a matter of location. And I would always encourage you in any regards to listen within yourself to your own inner guide, your spiritual guide, or the Holy Spirit, or the Spirit of Wholeness, whatever you want to call that, and receive your direction and instructions directly that way. So the idea of racism, right, and all isms, right? When you look at sexism, racism, and I can't even. My mind is just kind of almost wiped of all this sort of stuff, and I don't know whether my capacity to continue to make these sorts of videos is going to endure for much longer. We've got butterflies now, but all of these isms that the human experience is riddled with are symbolically something that, let's say, is an action of mind which is looking for perfection. Right now, try to think of it this way. You are spirit, right? You are spirit. You are, and for the want of better terms, I'm going to say from eternity. It's not like you've out of eternity and you're actually in the world. You're actually in eternity now, dreaming or having an illusion of dreaming that you are a body in a world, etc. But you are from eternity, right? And the natural state of the eternal realm is formlessness. It's a singular realm, right, where everything is one and everything is just pure light. And in that, the resonant frequency of that, if you want to try and associate it to something that you can maybe begin to get a concept for, is unconditional love, right? So we come from a realm where everything is just unconditional love, and everyone loves each other unconditionally. Try to get a sense of that. And then we find ourselves smack on the bum, pulled out of the birth canal, or pulled out of the birth canal first, then smack on the bum, educated into a world where everything seems to be separate from that, and we're separate from each other, and we have our own agendas and our own possibilities and potentials, and nobody knows if there's a God. It's as if we got a brain wipe of amnesia, and all we know is that something's not right here, and that there's this emptiness within, and we can't quite put our finger on what's wrong. But we look out into what we generally perceive to be a crazy world, and we seem to be the sane one within it, right? Denial is a very powerful tool. So intrinsically, at that deep core level where we don't remember reality, right? If you can imagine that there's a doorway, knocking, the door shall be opened. There's a doorway within you, or a place in your mind where that memory resides of eternity, and your own enlightenment will reveal that to you and give you back that memory in its fullness. But there is a place where that memory resides, and somewhere there is a tiny little calling for eternity within you, right? Now, that tiny little inner voice that calls, and makes you look out into the world and realize something's not right here, that voice stirs you to perfection, stirs you to look for the singular, perfect, unconditional state of oneness, right? Now, because you have ego, which is your temporal guide, this mind that always speaks first, the realm of consciousness, it co-opts that and corrupts that little voice, that little call, and for as long as it can, it will try to persuade you to look outside yourself, out into the physical realm for perfection, right? For oneness, rather than to look within, seek within, which where the kingdom of heaven is within. You are that, all right? And so for as long as it can, for as long as it can dangle that carrot in front of you, the ego will say, what about that person? That person fits into the box. Right height, right age, right skin color, right religion, right ethnicity, all these sorts of things. And we constantly do this zigzagging around different people's situations and events to try and find something that fits what we perceive to be the closest to perfection we can get here for us. Right? And of course the modern media would have you believe that the ideal penultimate kind of perfect relationship is going to be between like A-list movie stars, you know, where everybody's perfect features and wealthy and affluent and famous and all of perfect relationship, you know, for in that sort of regard. It's very stereotypical, but just to hold up one model, I could quote other, you know, but these things change, right? Everything changes out in the physical realm. So what happens is you find yourself with someone that ticks all your boxes, whatever, and then immediately, because the ego is judgmental, it will start to pick flaws in that person and start to destroy the credibility that it once gave it as being the perfect match, and begin automatically to sort of, ooh, what's over there? And ooh, look at that person. And ooh, that person's nice. And begin to corrupt that relationship. Right? Now, love is content, not form. And when you realize that, when you recognize and realize that love is content, not form, there's a maturity that happens in the mind wherein you realize that it doesn't matter who I'm with. Any particular chosen learning partner, whether they're old, young, fat, black, white, skinny, Latino, fucking you name it, every single one offers me the same opportunities in the process of healing my mind of judgment, in the process of truing up to the truth of myself within, right, and then allowing that to permeate and affect the truth of my relationships externally. Anyone's suitable, right? But we judge against, or the ego judges against, and it's like the ego's this little voice back here, and says, "Oh no, not that one," you know. And, oh well, that one, you know. And so imagine if you had a room full of 100 people, all mixed, you know, and your ego would automatically divide that room up, these people, and pick out probably 2 or 3 people in the room that, oh yeah, I could be with her or him, and I could do this and that, and we could probably, you know, and I could see me having kids with that one, but not that one. And without even getting to know these people, without getting to know any of them, it's just this automatic process. Now, you could look at that as the primal process wherein we're looking for a perfect mate, right, which comes from the primitive brain, the idea of the necessity to procreate and to survive and all of that stuff, and you pick a strong gene match as a partner, etc. But the corruption of it always still creeps in, right? And I know from my own experiences when I was a very young man, I was very blessed, surprised, and confronted, I guess, within myself to have found myself in a relationship with one of what I thought was the prettiest girls in school, that all the boys were trying to hold her hand, and it just sort of happened, you know. I didn't put any effort in, but it just sort of happened. And but even then, I realized within me there was this inner corruption taking place where my eyes would wander, and that idea that I was blessed and lucky and everything else was like, oh well, if I can get her, you know, if I can be with that person, then so. And very superficial, very juvenile, very immature. But racism works along those lines, right? Because we're looking for perfection, because that little call within us is seeking, is calling us to seek for perfection, and we are hell-bent on trying to find it out there where everything's always changing and it's going to be impossible. The closest thing you're going to find to perfection out there is the lack of perfection or the lack of continuity and oneness in it, apart from the fact that it's completely chaotic, and in that it lies its perfection in that sense. Right? It's perfectly chaotic, it's perfectly ununified, it's perfectly whatever, and it's unified in that. Right? But it doesn't reflect the true nature of our eternal beingness, and because we don't have a memory of that, because we've had this amnesia of what that is, what is God, what is oneness, what is unconditional love, we make it up as we go along, and we try to control and fix and change and fit in, and where do I fit in, and all of these things, and in an attempt to maintain an identity based on external parameters, right? And so when with the idea of racism, obviously, then we look outside ourselves and we say, well, I'm looking for perfection, right? You don't realize that's what you're looking for. You're just looking for something, and you don't know what that is, right? There's something here that I'm here to do. I don't know what that is, but let me look out into my world and judge the shit out of it and try to work out where I fit in, and then maybe, and in that fitting in that attempt to work out where you fit in, moreover, is the pigeonholing of, well, I don't fit in with that group. I don't fit in with that group. And we start to split ourselves up, And it's funny, if you ever watch migrants come to a new country, and we have a very multicultural population in Australia, but migrants tend to gravitate to their own little groups. Right? They feel comfortable, they feel welcome, they feel like they feel, and fine. You have to have that sense of belonging in the world before you can expand on it, right? There's this kind of, how am I going to find myself if I don't have a place to start from? And the place you have to start from really is where you are right here and right now. But quite often, and many people I speak to will say, well, I need to find a safe place. I need to find somewhere structured and where I feel I have a ability to manage my affairs before I can begin to look at my affairs and see whether they're truly relevant to the situation I find myself in and my perceptions of myself and the world. So that inner call, then, whilst it still is being corrupted by that voice that speaks for the external reality, that ego voice, there is no hope for inner peace. There is no hope for the solution to racism, sexism, any of those isms, right? At some point, and this has to be done on an individual level, at some point, the individual looks at their life and realizes, or makes an assumption that something's not right, it's not working, there must be a better way. Right? And I think my very first interactions with the idea of oneness was in listening to Bob Marley music and one love, one heart. Not much of a singer anymore these days, but those ideas that we are all one. You can play that out on the physical plane. We're all stuck on the same planet. We're all one in that regard. We all breathe the same air. We're all one in that regard. We all have the same vested interest in our survival of our species, race, whatever. We're all one in that regard. And in looking after the planet and whatever as best we can, being conscious of our footprint and everything, we're all one in that regard. It makes no sense to pollute the oceans and all that sort of thing. So, but eventually you realise that you're in a non-winning situation. It's like, no matter what I do here in the world, no matter whether I clean up my carbon footprint 100%, whether I stop breathing and stop farting and recycle everything and do, still death is coming. So which opens up the mind to the idea of what is the point? Why do all this? Why pay taxes for another 40 years, 30 years, whatever, just to struggle and die at the end of it as somebody who's maybe sick and whatever, and it makes no sense, right? So at that point where you realise it makes no sense, you can become very despondent with the world, and many people have given up hope there and commit suicide and things like that, only to perhaps be surprised at finding themselves in the DAF ready for reincarnation again, and boop, off we go. Another lifetime in the world to complete the learning circle that you're here to complete. But at that point where you look at the world and realise that every road you take in the world is the same, fundamentally, because it ends the same way, right? Then you can look at other ideas, new ideas, fresh ideas about your spiritual reality, about your higher purpose on earth, and begin to make meditational and studious endeavours into answering some of those bigger questions for yourself. Why am I really here? I'm tired of being a racist or a bigot or a whatever. And if you think you're not those things, include all those things into your association of yourself as a human being, because if they trigger you, it's you, right? If they activate your emotions, it's you. It's not somebody else. And when I say you, I'm pointing at me in the screen here. I can see myself. It's kind of funny. But, and I recognised the racist streak in me many, many years ago. And that came about from being schooled for a time in New Guinea, where my brother and I think were about the only two white children in school at a very a very young age as small boys, about 8 years old perhaps. I think my brother was younger than that, 6 or 7. And we were bullied and pushed, not initially, but we had long straight hair, and long in the fuzzy wuzzies, or the black kids up there, the New Guineans, who all had incredibly curly tight hair, would come and pull our hair and want to touch our skin, and that eventually turned over to poking, and then to punching, and then to pulling the hair, and I grew up with this cloaked kind of fear of being in the company of black people. Right, which made no sense to me, because I've always had this kind of I just want to love everybody kind of attitude. But, that experience was a catalyst for me to realise that my peace of mind and my sense of self could be affected by external factors if I let it, and that if I did let it, and if I was opinionated on the matter of fact, then healing would be required, because I wanted my perception of the world and everyone in it to be universal and to be unconditional, and I've been working on that ever since. And the funny story in that, when I realised that, like many years later, in my I think I was about 30 years old, I went to Shalom, which is a 1,000-acre commune in Tenterfield, for a rainbow gathering. I think it was the first one in Australia, and actually no, it was the second gathering I went to. That was the first one, but it was the second one I went to, which was at I think Girraween National Park, and I went up the track to relieve someone who was at the water pump pumping fresh drinking water into a container down below via a big hose, a little hand pump there backwards and forwards. And it was a black person, profoundly black skin, black, black. And as I approached that person, and I had been working on these ideas within myself, that why did I feel uncomfortable around people of other races and creeds and whatever. And I had realised by that point, through doing an open-eyed meditation with the Brahma Kumari in Brisbane, that my fear had come from those early years of schooling, right? It was activated by that. It was just like a segment of my human experience. It was activated as an idea of being afraid of people of different origins. And as I approached the person who I was going up to relieve from doing the pumping, I saw that he was profoundly black. And I could feel all this energy come up in me. And I'm like, all right, I'm not going to push it down. I'm not going to deny it. I'm not going to whatever. I need this out of me. I need this done, because this is fucking ridiculous living with this kind of, I better cross the road to get away from those kind of people, or these kind of people, feelings within myself that made no sense, because in my heart I wasn't a racist person. I didn't want to hate anyone or anything, and I had no malicious intent in in that as far as I could see, but yet I was still governed by it in a subconscious kind of a way. And so I went up to this chap and I said, look, man, I'm here to relieve you from the pumping and I'm going to do it for a while. And he was grateful for that. And I said, but first, I really need to give you a hug. I said, it's part of my thing. I just need to do this, you know. And a big smile, big smile came across his face. And he's like, yep, I'm here for you, man. I feel it, you know. And we had this massive hug in the middle of the freaking rainforest there, you know, at the water pump. And nothing happened immediately, but about an hour later, after I'd finished my hour at the pump, I went back down to the group. And as I was approaching my little group, that there was 1,000 odd people there, but I was sort of with a little cliquey group there. And as I approached them, I collapsed and I had a complete meltdown and started crying for about an hour. I couldn't stop crying. And I realised that the release of that, you know, I realised that all of that energy, all of that fear and that corruption of my innocent perception of the universal nature of humanity had been returned to me. You know, the corruption of it was gone. So, I mean, healing looks like whatever it looks like, but it stems from the idea of separation. All suffering comes from the idea of separation, that we are separate from each other, separate from God and whatever, which is not true. As above, let's say, in eternity, so on earth. God's will is done in the eternal realm. We are all one. Just as we are here, we are all one, right? We are not the flesh, we are the spirit. And when we begin and activate ourselves on our spiritual path, when we get to a certain point, we'll be able to... sorry, my eyeballs are sweating. We'll be able to enter into a universal communication with each other, which... which looks like that. To the outside, it looks like Dave having a crazy moment of... And anyone who's within that vibratory frequency of mind that has freed themselves from their temporal associations to a certain degree will be able to join into that experience and be reminded through that experience, which is collaborative, builds up in your mind, be reminded of not only the purpose on earth, but the nature of life in the eternal realm, which is whole and perfect and sinless and free, which is what you are right now. And the dream that you are having, the dream or the experience of your humanity, whilst it seems very real and tangible and with very tragic effects quite often, it cannot change the true and eternal nature of your beingness. And once you experience it, you cannot deny it. Right? And by the nature of that experience, you will then have no other choice but to find all your earthly cohorts not guilty. And that's going to set the cat amongst the pigeons, I know it is. But that's where you have to have an experience. Right? Oh, we've got a big skink. We've got everything natural going on down here today. I'll show you this fella. He's fast. Don't know if you see him there. But... you have to have an experience. You have to go through that process. You have to be willing to knock on the door, to seek and find, to give up the world and follow me, to seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and then all else will come to you. Right? We're not taught that in school. We are not taught to seek ye first the kingdom, which is within. And I'm not a religious person, but I have... you know, you got to talk about it in some kind of way, and the teachings of Christ in the New Testament are as good as a good a way as any, or the verbiage from A Course in Miracles, which is also the teachings of Christ in a modern day translation, is as good as any. And you know, it's as close as we can get to communication on the physical plane, in being able to use our words and verbiage to try and portray ideas that represent something other than the external association of our own affairs, in the hope that we might join in a hearing that enables us to then collaboratively transcend the level that we're at in our own understanding of ourselves and take a step up Jacob's ladder to a higher view or a higher perception of ourselves for a second that makes more sense than the one that we were on down below. right? And you're not going to understand that higher rung whilst you insist on staying on the rung below. You're going to listen to videos and read books and do everything, and for 20 years you're going to be a student of A Course in Miracles, or sit at the feet of some Eastern master and follow fucking Bungajis around and whatever their names are, and the lineage, and you're going to justify how you're involved, but nothing's actually happening. Nothing is going on there. You haven't activated yourself. So there has to be a leap of faith. There has to be this kind of inner pilgrimage wherein you just say, fuck it, I've got nothing to lose here, because death is knocking at my door every minute of the day. It could happen like that any time. Right? But it only happens as an illusion. It only happens, but then it's a long way to come back around again, pull you out and smack you on the bum and, here's a video. Welcome to a video. I'm doing another video. Have you seen this before? Maybe you're only imagining that you've seen it before. Maybe you're having deja vu. It's kind of crazy, I know. And it's like whole mind is always kind of fanciful. It's like when you have that experience. I had my experience of my enlightenment. I was in 1997. I was standing looking at a group of people who were reading the first 50 reviews of A Course in Miracles in a room. The first time I'd ever walked into that room in my life, not knowing that room even existed, that meditational place, looking at a group of people and thinking they were all crazy, realizing that I was judging them, and because I'd been sent there by a voice that I'd heard, I realized that I didn't know what was going on, and I made a decision in my mind, don't judge this. And in that, they vanished. I was looking at a blank wall. The wall vanished. I was looking at a garden outside and all the houses and everything else. That vanished, my body vanished, and I found myself awake in eternity, back in eternity, one with God, I and He and me. And retain that memory to this day. That experience of my enlightenment only lasted about 5 seconds. If I had to time it somehow, it's impossible. There was a few words spoken within it, and I expelled myself. I recognized that I expelled myself from that experience by questioning it, because doubt cannot exist in a singular state of certainty. And I found myself back in the room almost half an hour later, at the other end of the room, laying face down on the floor. And when I stood up, there was about 50 people around me holding hands. And I was washed by this huge sort of feeling of unconditional love. And I went around the circle and hugged everybody, and began the purification of my mind, or the atonement of myself, through the utilization of the principles of A Course in Miracles from that day on, which initially, the first couple of years, it was horrific. The first 10 years, perhaps. It's 22 years on now. I have no cancer, which is one of the things that propelled me to that prayer of the heart that enabled me to hear the voice that sent me to that place. And I've been helping people ever since to find their own tangible kind of association and relationship with the Course and with everyone and everything in the world since that happening. But all of those isms, just remember, all of those isms, racism and everything else, you cannot avoid them. The world is designed to set up fields of experiences that will attempt to dictate to you how it is you should fit in, right? Stop trying to fit in the world. Just say, fuck the world, and forgive the whole thing. Forgive yourself, forgive the world, let go of it. Just, abandon all the meaning that you've given it entirely and turn within, right? That's where you fit in. Meditation, the here and the now, this point here, and sit there, learn to still the mind, sit in the stillness, right? Be still and know that I am God, another biblical quote, right? Be still and know that you are also God. God is everything, that must include you, right? So sit in that, learn your meditation, be willing to forgive, let go, all of these things. And as you read through the Course or read the Bible, you'll get little inklings and little insights into things that you can apply in your world, things that you can use to make very small changes at first, but eventually those changes start to sort of pick up pace, and you're like, wow, I see this is working, and you want more. I see that relationship, I suddenly forgave myself for asking that person to play that part, and all of a sudden I'm not triggered by whatever it is they're playing, and they've stopped playing that part, things like that. It's like two dogs pulling on a rope. They both want to win. You've just got to say, well, fuck it. I see that us trying to win at this game where everything's always changing, the rules are always changing, is only going to result in death and finding ourselves back here to learn the lesson that, that our enlightenment is waiting to teach us anyway. So, well, that's about it. All suffering comes from the idea of separation, and it gets manifest out there as situations and events that we become involved in that catalyse those ideas in our minds of suffering, of pain, of victimhood, of being judged against, when in actual fact it's impossible that anyone judge against you, because you're only ever reacting to thoughts in your own mind about yourself in an attempt to validate the denial that you have of the universal nature of your relationship on earth and in eternity. Thank you. Well, that was a good one. A bit longer than I intended, but anyway, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Peace.